Family and fellow soldiers, I'm the Professor, and this is the Moment of Truth.
For 80-year-old Zeta Flowers, this isn't just a house. It's her home of 26 years. It's where she raised her 4 adopted children and more than 20 foster children, all on her own. Flowers runs a daycare out of her home, but the pandemic decimated her small business. Her rent of nearly $2,000 a month, she says, became unaffordable.
Before COVID, had you ever not paid your rent?
Oh, no.
Never?
Not ever, no. I'm a believer in paying for where you stay.
Like many cities across California, Oakland enacted an eviction moratorium during the pandemic, prohibiting landlords from kicking out tenants unable to pay their rent. But after that 3-year-long moratorium ended last July, landlords were allowed to begin demanding up to a year's worth of back rent and evict tenants who didn't pay up.
Tenants advocacy groups in San Francisco and Berkeley are also seeing spikes in the number of elderly facing eviction. Nationally, seniors are now the fastest growing age group experiencing homelessness, roughly 140,000 and counting.
How do you tell somebody who's 75, get back in the job market because you need to make $600 more a month, right? A lot of these situations are really impossible.
Her nonprofit took on Zeta's case after Zeta got an eviction notice from her landlord demanding she pay nearly $18,000 in owed rent or move out in 3 days.
What went through your mind?
What went through my mind, first of all, is they didn't care. To expect me on a short notice to move that fast, like in 3 days.
Advocates say the government is doing next to nothing to protect them. The Alameda County District Attorney's Office wouldn't tell us how many wrongful eviction cases it's prosecuted, if any. And the City Attorney's Office in Oakland has only tried 4 wrongful eviction cases over the past 5 years.
I'm seeing seniors out pushing carts now because they're homeless.
Instead of going to court, Zeta Flowers reached a settlement with her landlord that forgives her owed rent and provides her with moving expenses if she leaves by next month. Zeta now has time to pack. She plans on leaving Oakland in hopes of finding a new place she can afford.
Oh, you didn't know gentrification was real? And you thought that because you were a retiree that them folks would leave you alone and let you go gently into the grave? I talked about this last year, and on a side note, not to sound lecturing, family, but I gotta say this. I know that for a lot of you, perhaps most, it's more engaging for me to talk about pop culture or sports or entertainment, which I despise, or you prefer that I talk about current events, and while a number of the things that I talk about are certainly worthy, the things that we need to talk about most are things like the infant mortality rate, the maternal mortality rate, and whether black people are getting evicted from their apartments or even their homes. How it is that we're being economically strangled out of existence. That's far more important. Now, I know these things are not necessarily the sexiest things to talk about. These videos happen to be some of the most pertinent topics in my humble opinion, but they also get the lowest views too. These issues have to do with our survival, about whether or not we're going to stay on this earth. It has to do with our stability. And if black people, even in a place like this, cannot be interested in survival and stability, that means we're not going to survive. We need to focus on this stuff. Now, a lot of people don't understand why I keep pointing out that Gavin Newsom refused to tackle this issue of the housing crisis when he was mayor of San Francisco, and that the cost of living crisis is actually a cost of housing crisis, and California has been ground zero for this. Well, that's because the political leadership out there made the conscious choice they were going to allow all this stuff to happen. See, for you and me and every other black person in America, gentrification is a problem. But for the white political leadership, both Democrat and Republican, gentrification is a solution to the Negro problem. See, both red states and blue states practice this, and as we've seen, it's the blue states who have been among the most vicious and the most aggressive at making sure that black people can simply be moved out from any old place. The red states are trying to catch up to them. This is how both political parties whipsaw us one against the other. California used to be one of the most affordable places to live. That's why it became the most populous state in the nation, because it was affordable to live there. And of course, they had a very strong economy. Not to mention, from a technological standpoint, California is seen to be leading the country. For a good long while, there were all kinds of advantages to going out to California. A lot of black folks, especially those from the southeastern United States, would move out to California. There's a lot of black folks who left the South and went out west. and a disproportionate number of them landed in Los Angeles and San Francisco. The black population of San Francisco was the vital heartbeat of that place, but the white supremacists went ahead and put an end to that. And I'm talking about the white supremacists on the left, your Nancy Pelosi's. See, she's been out there for 50 plus years in California politics, San Francisco politics, and she's been knee deep in ethnically cleansing that place of black people, all the while pretending as if she's so sympathetic to black people. And you got some Negroes like the Congressional Black Talkers who just gobble that stuff up and tell black folks, oh, these are the people who are on our side. No, they're not. California used to be an affordable place to live in. Young people used to be able to get a starter home fairly easily, but I'm talking about decades ago. We're talking about the 1970s. The 70s was the last time you had any sort of upward mobility out there. It's been generations since California has been readily affordable, especially for young people, and since the tech boom, it's gone insane. But those big investment firms like BlackRock buying up entire neighborhoods, they've made a bad problem infinitely worse. But they couldn't have done it without the politicians' active support, because these politicos were getting huge campaign donations from these real estate investors and these private equity firms, and they intentionally sold the people out. You don't see any of them saying that the cost of mortgages have to come down. None of them taking a campaign promise that they're going to be bringing down all of these sky-high rents. None of them doing that. Young people cannot save up to buy a home because all their income is going simply to keep a roof over their heads. Rent that has become as expensive as mortgages. It's a vicious cycle. Ordinarily, you might say, well, something's got to give, but does it? Look at those third world countries, and you understand that permanently impoverishing the population can become the norm and stay that way. And who is it who catches the brunt of this economic catastrophe? Black people, the ones who are least able to withstand it. Now, for those of you who don't know, Oakland is supposed to be Kamala Harris's old stomping grounds. She was a DA out there. And across the bridge in San Francisco, that's where she became the plaything for low-down Willie Brown. She too did the old song and dance that all the Democrats do about how she's for the people, etc. But this is how she left the black people who she falsely claimed to have served. As San Francisco has become too expensive to live in, you got a lot of non-black San Franciscans who have begun going to Oakland, and they're opening up their restaurants there, and these old little boutique businesses, why, they've got their own nice little adult playgrounds that they're trying to create over there, and it's working out very well. And don't let the white media headlines fool you. When they sit there talking about dropping rents in Oakland, what they're talking about is the $2,000 that this 80-year-old black grandmother couldn't afford. Well, for non-black residents, that's very easy for them to afford. That's a bargain. Oh my God, only $2,000 compared to San Francisco, that's a steal. See how the difference works depending on who it is that you're talking to. So for these folks coming in from San Francisco, $2,000 a month, which is completely out of reach for most of the black folks in Oakland, as far as they're concerned, this is better. This is the promised land. Oh, Oakland, man, they're just dropping prices like crazy over there. Yeah, in comparison for certain people. See how the white media reports on this? Two different realities. This is what's happening in Oakland, been going on for several years. You see, those non-black transplants from San Francisco, they tried for a while to stay on their side of the Golden Gate Bridge, and they tried to find affordable accommodations in San Francisco County because they couldn't live in the city core anymore, so it's like we got to go a little bit further out. But as the tech giants, employees, and real estate firms gobbled up all of the housing and raised rents inside the city beyond the stratosphere, people were forced to move further and further out of the city center, and eventually the same savage capitalists who drove them out of the city began to drive them out of the suburbs and eventually even the exurbs. Those largely white San Franciscans found themselves pushed so far away from the places where they actually earned their money at, they were looking and going, well, hell, instead of us moving further and further into San Francisco County and eventually out of it, why don't we just go across the bridge? It's a hop, skip, and a jump to go just across the bridge over there to Oakland. It's a lot more affordable, more convenient. And then that's what they did. They started to displace the black residents there. This is the aggregate result of that. Because a lot of these landowners that are coming in are not actually Oakland residents. A lot of them are transplants from San Francisco. It's class warfare on steroids, and the city leaders are clearly not on the side of the people, definitely not black people. And one more thing. Occasionally I see comments from the Democrat plants and shills in the comments section saying stupid stuff like, how come you always coming down on the Democrats? Why don't you ever criticize the Republicans? First of all, I constantly excoriate the Republicans. Your problem is you're so hypersensitive to even the slightest critique of the Democrats because a lot of you are hoping to get jobs from the Democrats. That's what these plants and shills are for. Please don't kid yourself that the people that you see attacking anyone like myself are like, why are you attacking the Democrats? These people are usually lifelong Democratic operatives. These are individuals who think that they're going to carve out some sort of career for themselves as a Democratic Party operative. That's what they're trying to do. And this is what they do online. This is how they earn their bones of the Democratic Party. They bounce around from place to place pushing the party line. Let me tell you something. If you're a person of principle, then it's the principle that comes first. The principle you stand for is supposed to be everything. So when you see that the Democrats aren't doing what they're supposed to be doing, you're supposed to call them out on it. That is, if you're a person of principle. And the Democrats are the ones who falsely claim to be the champions of the downtrodden and the disenfranchised. Hey, anybody remember how Biden said the black community's got my back and I've got theirs? Yeah, he's got our backs all right. That's where he puts the knife. Now, that's my perspective when it comes to the political dimension as to how this was inflicted on the black people in Oakland, especially the black elderly. But there's another aspect of this that I would be remiss if I didn't mention. And this is not a matter of victim blaming, but there's a reality here that has to be faced. The black baby boomers in particular were the generation who grew up thinking that the world owed them a living, more or less. They didn't care about legacy. And they left their children and grandchildren to fend for themselves. And then they had the nerve to turn around and talk about how they're elders, and they're supposed to be revered. Now, of course, the woman profiled in this piece, they're showing that she's basically using her home as a daycare center and she adopted numerous children. She would seem to be something of an exception to this rule, but I'm going to get to that in just a moment. What needs to be remembered, though, is most of the people out there in Oakland, especially the black elderly ones who are getting crushed by this eviction tsunami, they're not like this 80-year-old woman who's adopting children left, right, and center and using her home to teach the little kiddies how to read. She's an exception. She ain't the rule. The black baby boomers, by and large, did nothing for anyone, not even themselves. The elderly are the fastest growing demo of homeless people, but then again, that's par for the course. Sounds like someone stomping the gas on social Darwinism is what this looks like. See, too many black baby boomers starting in the 60s, they thought they'd work for the post office or at the plant. And then they coast off of Social Security, and then they just kick back and wait for the Grim Reaper. They would be able to spend their golden years in security and comfort and safety, and they're finding out too late they're not going to have any of that. Now, family, we should take the trifling, self-centered treason of the baby boomers as a cautionary tale for ourselves. We got the millennials, and especially Gen X, who need to be taking notes about how this happened to them, so that we don't fall into the same trap. The baby boomers grew up trying to have it both ways. They wanted to be for black empowerment, but only because they were denied entry to the white sororities that they wanted to get into. They were denied admission to the white Elks Club they wanted into, denied the ability to fraternize with white society, which was what they really wanted. But they ran around popularizing so many of the problems and dysfunctions that we're still wrestling with today. They were the ones who prioritized trying to get themselves a job at the plant or the post office and, of course, some interracial sex. Then they went styling and profiling throughout the 60s, 70s, and even into the 1980s, some of them into the 90s. And then they decided that it was time to kick up their heels as they got into their emeritus years. But, of course, white supremacy has no permanent plans where any black people are concerned, so the black folks who thought to themselves that they had a few more years to pay off their mortgage, white supremacy said, we got this little housing crunch that we're going to put on you, this housing crisis, the mortgage crisis of the early aughts, we're getting you the hell up out of here. A lot of people found themselves instantly turned into renters, and even the ones who were able to hold on to their homes, if the mortgage cost didn't get you, those property taxes would. And understand something. The mass disenfranchisement of these elderly homeowners, that's all part of the plan. See, there's another side to all this that also needs to be mentioned. There's a shortage of houses being built. And no matter what the white media or the politicians or the social scientists may tell you, it's not because of a lack of labor. There's tons of people looking for work, especially men looking to work in construction. The decision, however, was made by the real estate investors that they want to make sure that there's never a surplus of houses on the market. They want to keep the housing market tight. Too many houses on the market, and their investment will lose its value. And to exploit and ultimately kick the baby boomers out on the street, that's part of the plan. See, the baby boomers are starting to die out. And the thinking of these real estate types is that as the boomers die out, that's going to free up some of those homes. But before some young people go thinking to themselves, okay, I'll go ahead and buy myself some rickety old shack that some baby boomer left behind when they died, The real estate types have decided, well, maybe you will get that, but it's going to cost you a king's ransom. And as far as new construction goes, well, we want to bring that to a crawl. It's all part of the plan. That's the kind of evil calculation that the real estate developers are doing. So as the baby boomers die or get evicted, this is not going to lead to the building of more housing. They're just going to look and say, well, here's some houses that have come free, assuming that BlackRock or somebody else doesn't buy them, that is. And you guys can go ahead and have triple knockout brawls to see which one of you gets that. And it'll all be selling for a mint. And that's because this is about impoverishing as many people as possible. And the so-called leadership are letting it happen. They're just going to keep lying to the public and falsely claiming that there's just no labor to build homes. Or their favorite lie du jour, it's these city ordinances, it's these zoning commissions. There's not enough areas in these cities that are zoned for single-family dwellings. That's the problem. It's a bureaucratic issue, a zoning issue. Never mind the fact that a number of cities already have areas that are clearly immediately zoned for single-family dwellings. And then what we hear is, well, it's the cost that go along with environmental surveys. It's just a bureaucratic thing, you see. Even in places where they knock that down, they just go on to one excuse after the next. They're going to be blaming city ordinances, regulations, the man on the moon. It just won't stop. The reality is these real estate people give huge amounts of money to the politicians and they use it to buy policy. There are no laws or regulations where these guys are concerned because they write the laws. As black people, we better start learning to stick together. That's the lesson that I hope is taken away from all this. And this includes across generational lines. That crap the boomers did where they threw away the greatest opportunity to secure our futures has now backfired with horrifying results for them. They thought that they would take care of themselves and just tell their children and grandchildren, y'all just need to figure it out on your own. Well, that's what happened. And here they are needing help, and their children and grandchildren are telling them, y'all just need to figure it out on your own. Black people as a group are terribly dysfunctional when it comes to understanding the nature of what we're up against. But the black boomers in particular have had this love-hate relationship with white supremacy. They hated that they were not allowed to get into the clubs that they wanted into, but they also loved the idea that maybe they could get in one day. They won't ever admit it, but their actions speak far louder than their empty denials. That's a reality the boomers simply refuse to accept. If you haven't done anything to secure the position of your children, then you can't realistically expect them to be in a position to secure your future. If you haven't done the work to make sure your progeny's position is secure, then the chances are excellent that you haven't even bothered to make sure your own position is safe either. And the boomers aren't even looking out for each other or themselves. That's where we get back to this nice little old lady who's getting kicked out of the streets. See, the boomers are supposed to be looking out for each other, at least you would think so. As much as they were willing to close ranks against their own children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, truth be told. You would think that these guys would basically be a mutual admiration society, but they're not. The selfishness was absolutely terminal, and here they are, needing to be able to rely on one another, and they can't. See, there's this fiction the white media likes to push that the elderly somehow have some sort of inside track when it comes to the voting process. Now, while it is true that elderly voters consistently vote more often, it's also true that seniors notoriously only have a limited amount of funds. After all, it's not as if some septuagenarian can suddenly just jump back into the labor force because they find themselves having to cough up a few extra $100 a month for living expenses. When they retire, all they've got is that little old Social Security check, most of them. Or if you're lucky, you got a pension, but that's it. And if that little nest egg of theirs isn't enough, or if white power inevitably decides to pull the rug out from under them, then they're stuck. But because they've been fed this nonstop diet of white media propaganda that the elderly vote is so important, they've convinced themselves that the powers that be wouldn't dare let anything happen to them because their vote is so important. And this is why we constantly hear about the elderly being taken advantage of, left without care or benefits. They drank the Kool-Aid. It seemed sweet enough in the beginning, but it was a poisoned chalice they drank from, and that never ends well. The moral of this story? You can either be realistic about the situation, or you'll find yourself literally out of house and home. Good day, and be one. I'd like to take a moment to mention some of our contributors. Frederick Dawkins, R. Laz, Lisa Taylor, Mark Stroud, and Black to Deaf. Salute to them and thank you to everyone for listening, liking, and sharing this message. Black empowerment only exists because of you.